Hello and welcome to the 2022 Celebration of the Humanities. I'm your host and moderator, Ana Gonzalez. In tonight's program, you'll hear from Rhode Island's congressional delegation, the Council's esteemed honorees, Executive Director Elizabeth Francis, and keynote speaker Monica Guzman. Tonight's honorees are Joan Abrams, educator, civic leader, philanthropist, and humanities advocate, and recipient of this year's Honorary Chairs Award for Lifetime Achievement in the Humanities. Josh Short, founder and artistic director of the Wilbury Theater Group, and recipient of this year's Tom Roberts Prize for Creative Achievement in the Humanities. The House of Glitter for its work, The Historical Fantasy of Esek Hopkins, recipient of the 2022 Innovation in the Humanities Award. The Door Rebellion Project website, recipient of the 2022 Public Humanities Scholar Award. This year, the Rhode Island Council for the Humanities is focused on amplifying the links between the humanities and civic health. I've seen firsthand the power of the humanities to engage local communities. The Council has supported my work documenting local histories of immigration, music, and culture, and helped me develop my voice as a podcast producer and host. I hope today's conversations inspire you as we explore humanities perspectives and projects that address the profound challenges to civic life we face today. Thank you for joining us.
As we celebrate the humanities, we recognize Indigenous Rhode Islanders, including the Narragansett, Niantic, Nipmuc, Wampanoag, and Pokanoket peoples, as traditional stewards and inhabitants of this territory. We recognize the histories of colonial violence and dispossession against Indigenous communities in Rhode Island. Indigenous people from many nations live, study, and work in Rhode Island today, and we gratefully acknowledge their ongoing contributions to our state. We also recognize that the state of Rhode Island exists in part due to the forced labor of enslaved and indentured people of African descent and Indigenous descent. We acknowledge and honor the integral contributions of these Rhode Islanders to our state, and we value their legacy in Rhode Island's civic and cultural life today.
The humanities foster the culture and civic ties that build a resilient society. They improve the quality of community life and strengthen our democracy. That is why I'm so proud to join the Rhode Island Council for the Humanities in celebrating the work of this year's honorees. Your work has educated and entertained us. You have challenged us to see things in new ways. Thank you, and congratulations on receiving this much-deserved recognition.
Congratulations to the 2022 celebration of the Humanities honorees. Well done to you all. Like these honorees, the Rhode Island Council for the Humanities has helped preserve and celebrate culture and the humanities for years. Thank you for all of your wonderful work. Now more than ever, we need to appreciate the values and the institutions that bind us together and make this country great. And in that spirit, protect against vandals juiced up on lies and propaganda who would tear those values and institutions down from inside our country. We cannot let that happen. Humanities matter. Keep up the wonderful work.
Hello, everyone. I'm Congressman Jim Langevin, and it's an absolute pleasure to join you virtually this evening for the 2022 celebration of the humanities. Thank you to the Rhode Island Council for the Humanities for putting together tonight's event and for all the incredible work that you do to keep our history alive, our culture vibrant, and our citizens engaged. And congratulations, especially to this year's winners, Joan Abrams, Josh Short, House of Glitter, and the Historical Fantasy of Esek Hopkins, and the Door Rebellion Project. Your impressive bodies of work represent the very best of Rhode Island's humanities community, and tonight we honor you. So I want to say thank you to all, and congratulations.
Good evening. I'm Congressman David Cicilline, and I'm grateful to be joining this year's celebration of the humanities. Congratulations to our honorees, Joan Abrams, Josh Short, the House of Glitter Dance Company, and the team behind the Door Rebellion Project website. I'd also like to recognize the outstanding efforts of the Rhode Island Council for the Humanities. Thank you for the essential work you do each day to enrich our state's culture, foster common understanding, and strengthen our democracy. At this critical moment in our history, the humanities remind us that we often have more in common than what sets us apart. That's why I continue to support significant investments in the National Endowment for the Humanities to strengthen our civic engagement and our connections to one another. The achievements of tonight's honorees and the work of the Rhode Island Council for the Humanities remind us why these investments are so important for the civic health and vitality of our state. Thank you for your outstanding efforts, and congratulations once again.
I think that one of the most important parts of the Council's mission is that it's the humanities by and for all Rhode Islanders. That, of course, is an aspiration, but that's really what we believe in, that people create humanities, and we want as many people as possible to be reached by the humanities. So I think that what our role is to catalyze the ability of people and organizations to carry out humanities activities and to connect with audiences, participants, co-creators. And that could be many, many things. It could be a documentary film. It could be the creation of an archive. It could be a neighborhood cultural festival. But all of those things together are the humanities. There's a lot to worry about these days. But there are also ways to see how community can be created and is created. We worry about political polarization. We worry about the decline of Americans' participation in civic institutions. But people are making community every day in ways that haven't necessarily been recognized as contributing to civic health. That could be going to the park for a festival. It could be going to a community conversation at your library. It could be just being in a book group. And those things haven't necessarily been recognized as civic health, but when you do include those factors, and those factors come from and are the humanities, that you have a sense of a pathway toward a more robust, civically healthy society. We often go to exhibitions and theaters and go to the websites and see really amazing digital products. The celebration is about recognizing the people who create those and their vision and the work that they do and how transformational that is. So it raises the visibility of the people who make the humanities. The theme of the celebration this year is the connection of the humanities to civic health. And in a lot of ways, the celebration is an expression of civic health because it brings together so many people from different parts of our communities into a wonderful group for exchange and celebration. The celebration also raises vital funds for the Council's work, and none of that work would be possible without the commitment and the generosity of our sponsors, of our board members, and our dedicated staff.
Now it's time for the honoree profiles. These short films offer an inside look at the work and passion of our inspiring honorees.
People understand humanities because their educational background taught them that the humanities include, history, philosophy, literature, etc. What I say about the public humanities is understanding all those things and using the humanities to help us understand who we are, all of us, and what makes us the same and what makes us different. What I do has changed. I've had about 4 careers, starting with corporate marketing and public relations. Then I decided to do a change, went back, got graduate degrees, started getting involved in the not-for-profit world. And I hadn't been involved in that at all, but it was very fulfilling, I found, to be a volunteer, a campaign leader, all different roles in the not-for-profit world. I wish I could say that I made every decision, sat back, decided what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go, but I have to admit, a lot of it's been serendipity. What I would say, though, particularly in the different boards, I've been chair of several and involved in many, and now back at the one where I started, Save the Bay, is I think the connective tissue among them is they make Rhode Island a better place.
Joan has brought the Humanities Council to the attention of so many people, And it's been so much fun to be part of that process. And I feel like I get to play a particular role of saying what we do, and it's Joan who makes the connection and tells the stories, and that awakens people's interest.
The other thing about the public humanities that I think should come increasingly to the forefront is that it is the best way to create conversation among people. It helps us realize that we have much more in common than we have apart, that we can have a reasonable discussion about a difference of opinion about something that's very important, but move on and find out that we do agree about so many other things. And along with that, however, is a recognition that we have a country with a civic structure that enables us to do that. That includes understanding how government works, understanding the power of a democracy, understanding our obligation and our privilege to vote. One of our obligations as humanists or as people involved in the public humanities is to encourage the understanding of our civic responsibilities and our civic opportunities. And I think the public humanities is arguably one of the best ways to do that.
The Woodbury Theater Group started in 2012. It sort of just started, talking with a friend of mine. We weren't doing anything, we weren't casting anything, so we got together and called up a couple of friends and we put on the play, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? And that went really well. It did well, and after that, just wanted to keep going. It's been an interesting journey because it was very bootstrapped, shoestring, just find a space anywhere we could and put on a play, which took us kind of all over the place. I kind of think about the theater as this event that happens between the audience and the actors, right? And the audience is kind of just an extension of a community. And so a lot of the work that I've been most interested in over the years has been work that recognizes the audience in the room with the actors. There's this one room theater experience. What that has sort of evolved into is this idea of a community of well, what is theater? Is theater storytelling? And if it's with the community, shouldn't it be for the community? And so by extension, can't we get the community on stage to participate in that storytelling? If somebody is an untrained playwright and they've written a compelling story about something that's important to them and it shares a universal experience, then why isn't that worth putting on stage? And I think that in our programming, through our new works development program, kind of creating space where young artists could develop their work, that's manifested itself. But, in 2017, we worked with the Humanities Council on this production called the Olneyville Expo. It was a really exciting, eye-opening experience where we saw a lot of community members come out and share their stories. We had, everything from like a children's church group get up on stage and, dance dressed like woodland creatures, and, a priest from a church up the street come out and talk about how he'd seen the neighborhood change over the years, to, a local teenage hip hop group get up and perform. And, I think performance and theater, they kind of get muddied and, and sort of heightened that, to a place where they're restrictive and they cut people out from the experience. The best theater is the theater that, you see yourself on stage, you identify with the story being told.
We're standing here outside the former home of Isak Hopkins, who was commander of the slavery ship Sally, hired by the Brown brothers of Brown University. And the House of Glitter has been living here in an artist residency in collaboration with the amazing Providence Parks Department and the Department of Art, Culture, and Tourism since December of 2019. The voyage of the Sally is notorious amongst historians and scholars who study the history of slavery because of the 196 kidnapped African people aboard the Sally 109 died in passing. Through the actions of our municipal government and through institutions and historic preservation, we're taught to respect this name and to view this as an accomplishment. But are we really thinking critically about what he accomplished and what value he added to our society?
The Historical Fantasy of Isaac Hopkins is an original activist dance opera, an original album. It's going to be a coloring book, a curriculum, and I would say in general it's a community engagement initiative. It's a fantasy that allows the public to step into engaging with the story, the legacy of Isaac Hopkins, as someone who is not necessarily known very well, but you know, there's a middle school, there's a statue, there's a park, there's a house, and so many people don't question these monuments.
As we were doing research, we uncovered John Carter Brown's archive, and amongst his archives, we found Isaac Hopkins' logbook. One ledger line that has resonated with us was the memory of the woman who hanged herself on the first voyage of the slavery ship Sally. And we only know that she exists because she's on the inventory list next to bottles of rum and rope. In 2020, 2021, and 2022, we've been called as a society to examine our relationship with the Black woman in America. And so, even in a contemporary sense, this woman is significant and has something to teach us. The Historical Fantasy of Isaac Hopkins imagines her as a fully realized human being.
I guess you can call it a landmark as far as like us being here. But it's not the end of the course, you know? Like, we're hoping to take that story and just like inspire others with it and like hopefully get other people to think and research and consider their own stories and how they sort of intertwine with the history and the legacies that's being presented on these lands and being memorialized on these lands.
The Door Rebellion is rather a remarkable event in not only Rhode Island history, but also United States history. And as a boy, I was intrigued by the fact that we had two governors and two legislatures at the same time. So I've had this lifelong passion for the Door Rebellion. And as I got older, I began to acquire books and ultimately broadsides and literature.
Rusty, Simone, and I had collaborated on a number of projects related to the Door Rebellion. Russ was a mentor of mine, and we approached the Phillips Memorial Library, where they had a great digital service team led by Mark Caprio, and we felt that they could help us on the digital side to build what Russ and I could not.
So I saw this as an opportunity to, one, share my passion, but also get to those young kids that are 13 years old and in the 8th grade and inoculate them with a passion for Rhode Island history as well.
I think what you see is that the Door Rebellion and the rhetoric connected to Door's movement, they were really having a wide-ranging conversation about the meaning of democracy. So you really see this conversation in Rhode Island, and this is long before the Civil War, long before Reconstruction, about citizenship, who is and who is not a citizen, the right to vote. These are all kind of essential questions that teachers will get at with students. When Russ and I set out to make the site, we certainly always viewed it from the standpoint of civics. We firmly believe that the study of history is vitally important for the education of a citizen. And what we hope from the site is that students will develop in their analytical skills, their research skills, the ability to read closely documents, to analyze, to see that this is a complex event. There are multiple sides and angles that you need to, as a researcher, go through, think through.
The Door Rebellion was a time of a great political acrimony. Households were split, such that when I look at what's happening today and the polarization in American society, it's no different than what occurred in Rhode Island. And during a period of martial law, when people's homes were broken into by law and order men to arrest their neighbors, okay, their relatives in some cases, right? It tells me that there's always a period that follows that's a healing period. And I suspect even in today's acrimonious society, you will see a healing. Exactly when, I don't know, but it will come.
Hi everyone, and thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to join you today, and I especially want to thank Director Elizabeth Francis, the Rhode Island Council for the Humanities Board, the Rhode Island Congressional Delegation, and of course, our inspiring 2022 Celebration of the Humanities honorees. Congratulations. There are a few phrases I have to be careful about when I talk about polarization, depolarization, and how we move through these dangerously divided times with our civic health intact. One of those phrases is common ground. The thing is, I know how that sounds. I cringe when it comes up too casually in a panel discussion, or a heal the world to-do list, or even a question I'm asked in an interview about my book. Let's all come together and find common ground. I mean, it's hopeful, but in this world, in this cacophony, with these high stakes on so many big issues, I don't kid myself that appeals to common ground sound naive, or ignorant, or worse. I would like to know how you propose to find common ground with people who are okay with 18-year-olds buying assault weapons. A former colleague tweeted me days after the mass shooting of children in Uvalde, Texas. People think that finding common ground is about finding total agreement or hasty solutions. It isn't. They worry that finding what's shared means losing what's theirs, the power of their stories and their values to improve their lives and their world. But it doesn't. To pursue what ties us together is to resist what pulls us apart. It's a barrier to dysfunction, a launchpad to understanding and innovation, and the critical animating spirit of our civics. So it's time we stop cringing and start acting. It's time to give the search for common ground the credit it's due and give our fractured communities the benefit of its practice. And what a way to do it, Rhode Island, to hail common ground for a place that, geographically at least, has more of it than most. You've got 1,061 people here per square mile, second only to New Jersey in population density. Your ground is already pretty common. But where it isn't, with all the reckonings with your history, with your changing, challenged communities, and with all the diverse stories, perspectives, and awesome civic power that surrounds you, I'm going to show you how to find common ground anyways, and let it unlock some new ways through. But first, let's get back to that tweet, and get honest about where finding common ground seems like it's asking us not just to embrace a fantasy, but also to deny what feels like an unavoidable reality. I want to know how you propose to find common ground with people who are okay with 18-year-olds buying assault weapons, with people who want to take away my guns, take away my health, take away my rights. Drop in whatever issue you'd like, from whichever direction you'd like. How do you propose to find common ground with people I want nothing to do with? There are three tendencies in human behavior that do more than most to pull us apart. I call them sorting, othering, and siloing. Sorting, the tendency to want to be around people who are like us, especially in times of stress, fear, and anxiety. Othering, the tendency to put distance between ourselves and those we deem too different, when too different, social science has shown us, can mean barely different at all. Siloing, the tendency to hear about the world out there from voices that affirm the world in here. A tendency that's so much easier when you can friend and unfriend with ease. May the bridges I burn light my way, goes a quote that's been making the rounds online. Added up, sorting, othering, and siloing are the SOS, the call for help. It's tough to work against our own programming. So it's worth asking, how can we find common ground if it's in our nature to divide? Because it's also in our nature to connect. I run a workshop to help people build and flex the most depolarizing muscle we each have, our own curiosity. In one exercise, everyone breaks off into pairs, and people take turns asking each other question after question about the other person without being allowed to interrupt or respond in any way. And every time I've done this, everywhere from Florida to California to Ohio, someone has raised their hand when I ask what was hard about the exercise and said a version of the same thing. It was so tough, they say, not to tell them that I went to that school, that I also love that show, that their story about X reminded me about my story about Y. Not, in other words, to point out immediately and happily what they shared. We know that finding common ground matters because we come pre-equipped with the ability and the craving to do it, and we do it all the time. It's built into the mechanics of so much of our regular, everyday conversation, this discovery. Whether we're meeting a stranger or an old friend, whether we rant about the traffic or spark story after story from each other about the sports we love, the shows we watch, the things that worry us, a lot of the time it starts with discovery and moves toward connection. Even when the gap is really wide, this built-in common ground radar of ours leaves a mark. According to a study of 515 other studies, chatting in person with someone different from you, someone from your outgroup, reduces prejudice toward that group 94% of the time. This is such good news for the humanities, our cultural feast of knowledge and exploration that at its heart is all about human expression. A robust output of the humanities doesn't want a world so divided it's blinded, a world that shuts down and shuts up. The humanities demand what civic health demands, a world that can open its eyes ever wider to discover more of the complex truth of who we are. For that, we know we need to spark something else that seems elusive: civic engagement. Can that be about discovery too? When I think of engagement, I think of Captain Picard of the USS Enterprise. I used to watch Star Trek: The Next Generation obsessively as a kid. "Engage," he'd say, often at the end of an episode when one adventure was done and it was time for another. Engage meant revving up the starship's impulse drive and heading to something new. Across divides, that's not quite how we look at engaging each other. Instead, it's closer to something out of the mind of Providence's own H.P. Lovecraft, the writer of science, fantasy, and horror fiction. The oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear, Lovecraft wrote, is fear of the unknown. But if only the fear we have of each other were a fear of the unknown. Much of the time, what keeps us unengaged, running for the exits, is believing that we do know very well what other people think and why. 54% of Americans say other Americans pose the largest threat to this country. 19% of Americans have gone through depression or anxiety because of partisan divisiveness. And 77% say they have few or no friends from the other side. The bigger problem, in other words, it's not that we're too afraid. It's that we're too certain. Certainty is the arch-villain of curiosity. When we think we know, we don't think to ask. or to give ourselves the opportunity to discover common ground, or much of anything else. We think we know other people's motives when we don't. They think they know our motives when they don't. And another bit of subtext becomes clear. How do you propose to find common ground with total monsters? Now, fear, like certainty, is useful. It protects us from danger, but it shuts down discovery. You can't wonder about something you think is out to get you. When we believe too much that we are nothing like each other, have nothing to learn from each other, and might even be out to harm each other, our civic pulse slows way down. There are people who are so consumed by hate that they are worth fearing. But are there as many of them as you think? Don't waste your fears on anything but danger, goes one wise quip. I take it further. Don't waste your certainty on anything but truth. To be clear, the way to secure our civic health amid all this othering is not to turn down the complexity of what makes us different. We can't pretend we're the same when we're not, or that we agree when we don't. Instead, it's to turn up the complexity of what makes us who we are. To have a hope of finding common ground, we have to reveal our ground and let others reveal theirs. How? Try this. Instead of asking people why they believe what they believe, asking for their reasons, ask instead how they came to believe what they believe, asking for their experiences. And ask yourself, too. Each of us happens to be the world's leading expert in our own story, the only one who can describe our path because we were there every step of the way. Reveal the paths, and they'll reveal the intersections. This is how you find common ground naturally. To quote my Braver Angels colleague, Steve Saltwick, don't have an argument, take a walk. Few civic duties seem more obvious than casting a vote. And when I learned that a woman I'd recently met, Jessica, hadn't voted in the 2016 election, I wanted to know why. Or rather, I wanted to understand why. I could have asked her point blank, why'd you do it? And gotten her reasons, which would have gone right up against mine. But instead, I asked her to walk me down the path to her decision, and listened. And in my mind, I saw. I saw her growing up liberal in a conservative town, becoming more politically engaged, becoming disenchanted with the left, finding little to hang on to with the right. I saw her staring at her ballot in her farmhouse in Sherman County, Oregon, not being able to stomach voting for Clinton, not being able to stomach the thought of voting for Trump, not being able to stomach voting for some third-party candidate she didn't really care about. I saw her losing sleep and realizing she had just one choice. And I, who could never imagine not voting in a major election, saw that too. I saw her look at her ballot and leave that space blank. And I understood. I told her not that I agreed, but that I had spotted an intersection. I wouldn't want to cast a vote that didn't feel right by me either. But how do you propose to take a walk when you disagree on assault weapons and gun ownership, or election integrity and immigration? When you're sure and they're sure, and you're not just asking questions, when you're engaging the issue with your opposing perspective very much in play. How do you propose to find common ground when you just think they're wrong? At that point, your walk is going to be more of a hike, up a mountain with tough terrain, where the air gets thin fast, and you have to acclimate to the places you're pushing each other if you're going to stay in the conversation long enough to glean new insights. But how? Here is where you can use common ground to build resilience in a really important way. You make a base camp. Finding common ground is not about finding total agreement, but building the base camps that help you acclimate to each other's perspectives and climb higher. Finding common ground is not about rushing to solutions. It's about building the connections and fueling the discovery and capacity to make eventual solutions possible and keep you learning when it's hard. Roger Williams founded Rhode Island a quarter of a millennia ago as a pioneering, lively experiment in religious and political toleration. We've learned a whole lot since then about where those principles missed so many people for so long. But to make sure we don't slip into some new kind of blindness to each other, we have to keep learning about each other, with each other, despite our divisions, and especially when it's hard. Finding common ground has never been the end of the work. It's always had to be the beginning. How do you propose to find common ground with people I want nothing to do with people I don't want to understand? Because not understanding each other is no excuse for not taking care of each other. And we owe it to our communities, to our humanities, and to the full potential of our civics to marshal all the extraordinary things that we're capable of and try. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for being here. Just for our audience at home, I want to do a little introduction so everybody knows who's talking to them. We have Rusty Simone of the Door Rebellion Project website, Joan Abrams, who's a civic leader, philanthropist, and humanities supporter. We have Sita Coulibaly from the House of Glitter. And we have Josh Theater. Thanks for being here, everybody. Thank you. I just want to jump right into it. We're talking about two big things today that I don't know if I even fully understand, or if everybody watching would understand, and that's the humanities and civics. So those are like big words. I just want to kind of understand what your understandings of first, like what the humanities even are. And so I want to ask that to Joan, because I feel like you're the big supporter of the humanities. How would you define that?
Well, I think of the humanities, before I got involved with Rhode Island Council for the Humanities, as the disciplines in college that we take, like literature and history and philosophy, etc. But as I became more involved with Rhode Island Council for the Humanities, I think of the humanities as those disciplines, but also how we as publics interact. And we often interact by understanding those disciplines, and how they affect our lives. So public humanities is an extension of what we think of as the humanities department of the schools that we went to. The other thing I think of when I think about humanities, and I've said this many times, and Elizabeth has heard me say it ad infinitum, the humanities are who we are, as opposed to, in some cases, the arts are what we do. Now, they often intersect, but humanities are very much who we are.
That's a great answer. Yeah. And so like the idea of civic engagement, Russ, as a historian, and someone who deals very much in history and the history of the state, how do you define what civics are, civic engagement?
Well, I think it's how we as individuals interact as a community. When it comes to the humanities, I can't imagine life without it. It's what makes life worthwhile. And the civics aspect of it is how we interface with one another, as we're doing here at this table, when we go to a play to see something, Whether we are reading poetry or a book, it all comes together. But it's how we interact in the public forum that makes it for the civic side of it.
What about for Sita, like with your work, primarily dance and like classes that you teach, like what kind of feedback do you get? What kind of conversations are you having around your work?
I mean, as the House of Glitter, like coming off of this show, The Historical Fantasy of Isak Hopkins, our show was outdoors. It was in the community. It was on site at this homestead, and that was such a powerful means of engagement because it was literally centered in the community. The work that we did was centered in the community. So we did get that instantaneous feedback from folks who were coming to the show and then diving into this piece, this dance opera, and really coming out of it being like, oh, okay, this is a huge part of Rhode Island's history that so many of us are unaware of. And that felt like such a powerful, and honestly, one of the main pieces of feedback that we had gotten was folks saying, like, this was so important because I had friends, or I went to Isak Hopkins Middle School, or I live in the Branch Charles neighborhood, and I see that statue every single day, and or I've seen this house my entire life and never knew what this house was dedicated to or who it was dedicated to, and that felt very powerful. Again, especially coming from the community and myself being someone who was enlightened from this experience. And that, again, is kind of like this, the steamroller that just like keeps you going, because this work is about the community and it's the community's voice that continues to empower us to do what we do. And that's my favorite part about being an artist, being a dance artist, and being a woman of color, like being able to serve as this representation within this community, and to have people young children, to have a larger demographic of folks who are really interested in the work now because they've seen the show or because they've heard about our dance classes here at AS 220. And that's been, life-changing, at least for me as a young professional. And I can't imagine what that interpersonal engagement would be if we didn't do this piece of work. And so I'm so grateful for that opportunity, and also for just like this natural existence of being in Providence and being able to dive into our history and to highlight the voices of those who otherwise have been erased from history. And so that's been like a very powerful piece of feedback that we've gotten from being able to be in front of the community in that way.
Yeah, I mean, that performance was so moving. Literally, it was moving. Like, it was all around the house, and like there was the garden, and there were so many languages and just like different histories coming together. And I want to talk about this idea of like history in your work. And coming at it from like all these different angles, right? And like Russ as a historian and Sita doing this like very present day reinterpretation of historical events and names and places, like and Josh too, with your work and like what you choose to highlight, like how do you think of telling Rhode Island's history, because it is one of the first colonies, right? It has a long history as Rhode Island and even long history not as Rhode Island. So just like, how do you think about putting that into your work, or does that inspire you?
I think in our work at the Wilbury Group, it's less about Rhode Island specifically, and I think that people like to see themselves represented on stage. So wherever you do the work, I feel like you have an obligation to make that happen. And also, I mean, theater is about what happens between a performer and an audience. So whoever that performer is, whoever that audience is, whether it's Rhode Island or anywhere else, any community, anywhere in the world, I think that there's like an obligation to learn their truth and to have their truth be part of that experience that the two of those components share. You know what I mean?
Definitely. Yeah. And Sita, what about with your work, like that truth, that representation, and then combining it with this real history that you're living on the same land as like where it happened?
Yeah, I mean, I think truth-telling feels like the core and the root of really what inspired us. You know, I mean, imagine 5 people of color, queer folks of color, stepping into this home and then doing all of this history and, you know, this research about this person whose homestead, you know, we are living in and working out of, and just like finding out bits and bits of more information about just the history. Like the history is really deep. And we think about, whereas there's always this like misconception that because we are in the North, that we were exempt from all things to do with slavery, and like, you know, that's not the truth. And so yeah, truth-telling feels like the umbrella term for how all of this has come together and what continues to drive myself as an individual, the house as a collective.
And then Russ, on the other side of that, with like the Door Rebellion, which is one of the most, I mean, to me, like compelling bits of history in Rhode Island, if not the country.
I thought more of in the perspective of the world, possibly the most important thing. But in reality, the Door Rebellion, sort of like as you were saying, people that are underrepresented or not represented. The Door Rebellion was at a time when Rhode Island had been really an oligarchy. It was run by a few wealthy white males, and when the colony started, it wasn't intended as such. Okay, so in telling this story, I want people to think, and that's what the Humanities does, hopefully. If it's properly done, it allows people to leave that performance and think about it later that day or the next day, and to inquire. Sort of like, well, why is Admiral Street named Admiral Street? Well, it's after Isaac Hopkins. But in the case of the Door Rebellion, it's this uprising of underrepresented, disenfranchised males. Okay, this was a time when women did not have the vote. Though I question why that was, but they did not have the vote. And people of color in Rhode Island were disenfranchised in 1822 as part of what was going on in the North. They were disenfranchised. Up until that point, people of color could vote. There weren't tons and tons of them, but they could vote. So this uprising, as we look at it now, was to give the vote to males of all shapes and sizes, including men of color, got the vote in 1843. And one of the great stories is that, but also the role of women during this period of time. We tend to think of history as maybe the story of white men, when in reality, women were playing a most significant role in the Door Rebellion. This is 6 years before the Seneca Conference, okay, when Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton and others began the journey that's going to take 70 years to get the vote. But women in Rhode Island, Catherine Williams, Harriet Whipple Green McDougal, Abby Lord, Anne Pollan, these were all women that took the initiative. Men were either incarcerated or they were in exile. They were hiding in nearby Massachusetts or Connecticut. Rhode Island's a small state, so you can go hide without really going very far.
They're in the woods,
but it was the women that kept the fires burning and kept the meetings going. And that story doesn't get told. So, when you look at history that hasn't been really heard, that story needs to be understood and celebrated. And these ladies, they're not on a postage stamp. They don't have a street named after them, okay? But they did play a role. And the role of Humanities, I think, is to uncover these stories and then make it available to the public. I often thought it would be a wonderful thing to have a Door Rebellion play. The Passion of Thomas Wilson Dorr. And now I know where it could play.
Okay. They got a stage and everything. They got a dream team.
be a dance piece, maybe.
Yeah. A mix of all things.
Yeah.
There's a lot of cannon fire. There's a lot of,
Some spectacle, yeah.
Well, Josh, with the idea of representation, I remember one time you told me that your dream for like one of the best things, or like one of your goals, is to just like have there be less of a barrier between audience member and someone on stage. And like someone just being on stage could be a play, and like whatever they wanted to say is theater. And so with that idea in mind, like when you are looking at your seasons for the Wilbury, looking at Fringe Festival, what are you looking for, and what are you in a piece, and kind of that idea of representation of where you are in Olneyville, in Providence, in Rhode Island, and yeah, what's your goal with all those things?
I think the goal is to just make it as accessible as possible. And I mean, we don't pick seasons or plays based on plays themselves or things like that. We like invest in artists that we believe in, or people that we work with, or when like someone like the House of Glitter comes and approaches us about collaboration, it's like, yeah, we love what you're doing. We don't ask to see a script first. It's about the artists that are creating the work that we try and invest in. And for me, it's about tearing down as many barriers as possible so that we can get to that place where it's like there is that representation on stage, where people feel like that's me on stage. I'm hearing my story. I feel seen and heard when I come to this place. And that's what we're working towards ultimately.
Very cool. And so Joan, as someone who supports the humanities and kind of like is on boards and is thinking about funding and resources and guiding different foundations, like how do you think of that idea of representation, and what as you kind of have seen the arc of like humanities work done in Rhode Island, like has that shaped your mind?
Well, I was going to, as I was listening to my fellow humanists at the table, I thought that I would respond to your question, but also talk a little bit about what it's like to be someone who helps to enable some of the work, but who is not a practicing humanist, if you will, or a practicing theater director or dancer or historian. And I think we should celebrate and become a part of this. So you don't have to be a practitioner to have a conversation about it, and that's all part of the civics issue. So I think of myself as the only non-practitioner here, yet what I can do is help to enable these programs, but more importantly, I can take part in them. And I read much more about the Dorr Rebellion since I've known about this work than I did when I went to high school in Rhode Island. And I feel like not only do I know about it, I see its relevance given where we are in this country right now. And I don't think, I read a lot, I do a lot of different things, I just don't think I would have known about it without the work. So I would encourage my fellow non-practitioners, yet lovers of the humanities and lovers of the arts, to say, help where you can, but more importantly, let it help you understand what's going on. So when I first met Josh and then coincidentally just saw what Wilbury was doing in the next year, I said to myself and many others, we've got to go here because this is going to really expand our horizons. And I have to admit, I did not know about all of your work other than my involvement with the Council for Humanities. So I feel like I've been enriched, but I haven't necessarily done it myself. And I think we have to get that message out, because humanities seems very vague to some of us that are, that are not historians and theater directors and writers and dancers. It seems a little bit hard to understand. So that's how I see my role.
Well, thinking about that, I'm wondering about resources. So, like, what resources have you all had that have supported your work that you really love, and then what resources do you wish you had?
I'll start.
Yeah.
The Door Rebellion project was just a dream. I've been interested in it for something over, let's say, 60 years. Okay. I hooked up with this young PhD candidate, and at the time, a lot of universities were going through a process of digitizing everything, making it available to we, the public, to see. Okay. So the first thing we did is we went to the Rhode Island Council for the Humanities, and we got a grant. Okay. And that grant started the thing, and then we went to the Rhode Island Foundation and got some money, and we went to Heritage Harbor Foundation and got some money, and that was mainly to pay some of the people. In my case, I'm retired. I don't need to get paid. I'm just looking for something to do. You know? Okay? But I'm trying to tell a story. You're trying to tell a story. You're telling a story. Okay? So this concept of humanities is trying to make others aware of something that you're passionate about. You're passionate about dance. I'm passionate about the Door Rebellion and history. You're passionate about the theater. And it is those types of people that make living in Rhode Island such a wonderful place to be. And there's so many untold stories, okay? We're living in an age of social justice, okay? So all of a sudden, we're becoming aware of things that, frankly, we weren't aware of. And, you know, unless you're reading deep into history, you're gonna go through life not aware of it, okay? So it's our job, if you will, whether you're paid or not, to tell these stories and make it available to the people. They may not like to hear what the story is, but that's the way it is. And we're going to see more and more of that.
Question of resources for the two theater makers down there. Like what did you have that you were grateful for, and then what do you want to see kind of the future of humanities support?
I mean, so many of the similar resources of just organizations that have supported us with grants and things like that. But I think we wouldn't have had the historical fantasy of Isaac Hopkins without the John Brown Library at Brown University that has all of the archives, and through those archives we were able to like literally land upon the original manifest of the first voyage to the slavery ship Sally, and that was really kind of the impetus for our entire piece. I think also like our secondary resource that was so amazing was our community, and I'll come back to that because our elders, our ancestors who were doing the work before we were doing the work, before we even realized what the work was such a powerful experience for all of us to dive into our own personal experiences, to consult with our parents, our grandparents. We have some family members who have been in Rhode Island for generations and generations and remember things that their grandparents told them, and that seemed to be one of the most powerful, again, empowered experiences of learning from our community, learning from our elders, and really gaining that information. I would say what I see for the future and what I hope for the future is this access and gaining and to make things more accessible for the public, because I think you're right. Like there are so many more people who are not practitioners who don't know about the work. And I can even say for myself, like I had no idea. I've grown up in Rhode Island my entire life, and it wasn't until I was in this specific circumstance that I even learned who Isaac Hopkins was. I had friends who went to Isaac Hopkins Middle School and had no idea who Isaac Hopkins was, and that's problematic. Especially when Isaac Hopkins Middle School is predominantly Black and brown children. And so to not be aware of that history as a child, or to not even be aware of the surrounding neighborhood, the reason why I just learned something today, why Admiral Street was named Admiral Street. That is something I didn't even know as a part of this process. And that's something that I hope and I see for the future, also for like our education system. Like I hope when I have children someday that they grow up into education systems where they are diving into this work and are excited about it and are knowledgeable about where they come from and that they know what the native land is called before it was Rhode Island. And, that feels very important. And that's something that I didn't grow up with.
Absolutely. And I think too, I think Joan said, or Russ, one of you said that we're living in this like social justice awareness time period, and the conversations have gotten really heated about like what could be in our school system, and like, is this a way to talk about it in terms of like truth telling and humanities scholarship and just learning history as it happened from primary sources? Do you think that's a way around talking about like this highly politicized thing? Maybe, I don't know if Russ or Joan, if you want to answer that.
Well, I kind of think that, as these stories come to light, it takes people like you or me to make it known. Okay, it's always been there. Whether people want to hear it or not, your job is to get that out. Your job is to put it before them. And the thing I like about the theater, it's an experience. It's a one-time experience. You could give that performance 3 different times and maybe get 3 different kinds of vibes from it.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, so lightning round. Would any of you ever live anywhere else besides Rhode Island?
Yes.
Why?
Why? Yes. Where would you live?
I would go back to Mali. Yeah.
Yeah.
Permanently.
Not only would I not live anywhere else, I've commuted all my working life back to Bristol in the same house that we've been in for 45 years in Bristol. I am not a creature of change, obviously. I'll go back to my original point. Rhode Island is heaven if you want to get to understand the humanities, if you want to be up close and near the great artists that we have here, if you want to read about our past. I mean, it's ideal. We certainly have our issues, but in terms of a place to live, absolutely.
Wow. I would back that up with just also agreeing that, like, yes, I would live somewhere else, but there is nowhere that I have been in my lifetime that is like Rhode Island. And so I agree that even my experiences here, had friends come and visit me like, I love Providence. And I'm like, yes, okay. But that's only because I've lived here my whole life, and people come and they're like, I can't believe you have all of these things around you.
I mean, I don't want to say I would never live anywhere else. But I do love it here, and I don't, if that place exists, I haven't found it.
A lot of love. I'm feeling the love, everybody. Well, thank you all so much for sitting down with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you're inspired to have curious conversations about the role of humanities in our daily lives. And now, share this program. Get out there, talk to each other, and engage with your community.